Welcome back to the Cozy Cast. I'm so glad you could join us today.
And we have a really interesting topic lined up for you.
Okay, so I was reading the news this morning, and within 5 minutes, I wanted to throw my phone across the room.
Only 5 minutes? That's actually impressive restraint.
Right? But here's the thing. I realized I couldn't even explain why I was upset. Not in English, not clearly. I had all these thoughts in my head, complex thoughts about conflict and diplomacy, and I just didn't have the words.
And that feeling, that exact moment when your thoughts are too big for your vocabulary, that's what we're unpacking today.
Hey everyone, welcome to Speak Unstoppable, the podcast where real English happens through real conversations.
I'm John.
And I'm Maria. And if you're listening right now, you're probably somewhere between B2 and C1 level, which means you can handle everyday English pretty well, but when things get complex, philosophical, or political, suddenly you're searching for words that just won't come.
Today I'm feeling, honestly, a little heavy. Which feels appropriate for this topic?
I'm curious. Curious and maybe slightly worried will say something controversial. But that's the territory, isn't it?
It is. And listen, you could be anywhere right now. You could be scrolling mindlessly through social media or binge watching something forgettable. But you're here, choosing to stretch your English into uncomfortable territory. Thank you for trusting us with your time.
So here's a bold statement. If you can't talk about serious topics in English, war, politics, peace, conflict, then you don't really speak English yet. You speak surface English.
Ooh, that's harsh.
Is it though? Think about it. In your native language, you can express nuance. You can say, I disagree with this policy, but I understand the historical context. You can criticize without condemning. You can hold two opposing thoughts at the same time. But in English, suddenly everything becomes black and white because you don't have the gray zone vocabulary.
Okay, I see where you're going. And I think a lot of our listeners feel this. You're at a dinner party, someone brings up politics or current events, and you just go quiet. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you can't say it the way you want to.
Exactly. And here's the metaphor I want us to hold on to throughout this episode. Learning to talk about serious topics in English is like learning to paint with a full palette instead of just primary colors. Right now, you might have red, blue, yellow, strong opinions, simple statements. But the real world? It's all shades of purple, green, orange. It's complicated. And you need the vocabulary to paint those complicated pictures.
I love that. And maybe you've been there, watching a news debate in English, understanding maybe 60% of it, but missing all the subtle arguments, the implications, the things being said between the lines. I love that. And maybe you've been there, watching a news debate in English, understanding maybe 60% of it, but missing all the subtle arguments, the implications, the things being said between the lines.
Or worse, you try to express your opinion about something complex, and it comes out sounding extreme when that's not what you meant at all.
Yeah. I think the government should do something when what you really meant was, I believe there should be regulatory oversight balanced with individual freedom. Totally different.
Totally different. So today, we're going into that territory. We're giving you the palette, the full range of colors. Let's paint.
All right, real talk. Last month, I was at a social gathering. Very international crowd, lots of languages floating around. Someone mentioned a conflict happening in the news, and this woman, brilliant woman, worked in finance, spoke 3 languages. She just said, war is bad. People should stop.
Oh no!
And the thing is, I know she had more sophisticated thoughts than that. I know she did. But in English, under pressure, in a social setting, that's what came out. And everyone just kind of nodded politely and changed the subject.
That's heartbreaking, actually. Because what she probably meant was something like the humanitarian cost of prolonged conflict is devastating, and diplomatic solutions should be exhausted before military intervention.
Right. Completely different level of thought.
And this is where we need to talk about the difference between stating an opinion versus providing analysis. This is crucial. An opinion is simple, I don't like this. Analysis is layered, I understand why this is happening, I see multiple perspectives, but I lean toward this position because of these specific factors.
Okay, so let's break this down. The phrase to provide analysis, that's formal, professional. It means to examine something carefully, break it down into parts, and explain how those parts connect.
In a real scenario, imagine you're in a work meeting. Your company is expanding into a new market, but there's political instability in that region. Your boss asks, "What do you think?" You don't just say, "Seems risky." You provide analysis. You might say, "Looking at the current political climate and considering our long-term investment timeline, I'd recommend waiting until after their upcoming elections. The risk-to-reward ratio doesn't favor us right now."
See how much more credible that sounds? You're not just nervous. You've thought it through.
Another key phrase here: to take into account. It means to consider something as part of your thinking. We need to take into account the historical tensions between these groups.
Not we should think about, which is weaker. Take into account sounds professional, measured.
I use this constantly. When planning my work schedule, I take into account the fact that I'm useless before 9 a.m.
That's self-awareness and analysis combined.
And here's one more for this section: to examine something from multiple angles. When you say this, you're signaling intellectual flexibility. You're saying, I'm not stuck in one perspective.
We need to examine this policy from multiple angles before we commit.
Or in a debate, I think we're only looking at this from one angle. What if we considered it from the perspective of small business owners as well?
That phrase, from the perspective of, that's also gold. It's how you introduce someone else's viewpoint without necessarily agreeing with it.
Right. From the government's perspective, stricter regulations make sense. But from the perspective of individual citizens, it feels like overreach. You just held 2 truths at once. That's advanced English.
Maybe you've been in that situation. You're listening to someone explain why they support a particular political decision, and you disagree, but you don't want to start a fight. You can say, I can see it from your perspective, though I personally lean in a different direction.
Respectful. Clear. No one gets defensive. Okay, so this is where things get interesting. Because in a lot of cultures, and I'm not pointing fingers, this is universal, disagreement feels like personal attack.
Oh, totally. Especially in high-context cultures where harmony is valued. If you disagree with someone's opinion, it can feel like you're rejecting them as a person.
But in English-speaking professional and academic environments, disagreement is expected. It's actually seen as a sign of engagement. The trick is doing it with the right language.
So let me share a story. I was in a seminar once, postgraduate level, very international group. We were discussing immigration policy. And this guy, super smart, great English technically, he said to another student, "You are wrong. That is stupid."
Oh, God.
The room went ice cold. Because in an English-speaking academic context, that's not just rude, it's incompetent. It shows you can't engage with ideas critically.
And what he probably meant was, I respectfully disagree with that conclusion because it doesn't account for X factor.
Exactly. So let's give everyone the tools. First phrase, I see where you're coming from, but this is your magic opener. It acknowledges the other person's viewpoint before you present yours.
I see where you're coming from, but I think we also need to consider the economic implications.
Not you're wrong. Not that doesn't make sense. Just I see your point. And here's another angle.
Next level, I'd push back on that slightly. This is beautiful because pushback means to resist or challenge an idea, but slightly softens it. You're disagreeing, but not aggressively.
I'd push back on that slightly. I think the data shows a more nuanced picture.
I use this in work emails all the time. I appreciate your proposal, but I'd push back slightly on the timeline. Given our current resources, I think we need an extra 2 weeks.
Another one. That's one way to look at it. This is so British, so diplomatic. It's basically saying, I disagree, without saying it directly.
That's one way to look at it. Another perspective might be that the policy benefits urban areas but leaves rural communities behind.
You're not saying they're wrong. You're just offering an alternative frame.
And here's a phrase for when someone makes a claim that's just factually questionable. I'd want to see more evidence before I draw that conclusion.
Ooh, that's good. Not you're lying or that's false. Just I need more information.
Professional skepticism. I've heard that argument before, but I'd want to see more evidence before I accept that correlation.
And finally, this is my favorite. We might have to agree to disagree on this one.
The peaceful ending. The ceasefire.
Right. It means we've both made our points. Neither of us is changing our mind. And that's okay. It's mature. It's respectful.
I think we're coming from fundamentally different values here, and that's fine. We might have to agree to disagree.
Maybe you've been in that situation. A conversation is getting tense, circles are being talked in, and you need an elegant exit.
That phrase is your exit ramp.
All right, this is the hard part. Because when we talk about actual conflict, wars, humanitarian crises, political violence, the emotional stakes are high.
Very high. And here's the thing. You might have friends or family directly affected by these situations. Or you might be watching from a distance, but still feeling deeply. Either way, the vocabulary matters because it shapes how people hear you.
So I want to talk about the difference between two phrases, to justify versus to understand why something happened. They're not the same, but people confuse them constantly.
Oh, this is so important. To justify means to claim that something was right or acceptable. To understand just means to grasp the reasons without necessarily agreeing.
I understand why the government made that decision, given the pressure they were under. But I don't think it was justified.
You can understand someone's motivation and still think they were wrong. That's intellectual honesty.
Here's a scenario. You're discussing a controversial military intervention with a colleague. They say, "How can you possibly defend that action?" And you respond, "I'm not defending it. I'm trying to understand the strategic reasoning behind it. even though I personally find it morally questionable.
That's sophisticated. You're separating analysis from endorsement.
Another crucial phrase, collateral damage. This is a military/political term that means unintended harm caused by an action, usually referring to civilian casualties in conflict.
It's a phrase that can feel cold, almost bureaucratic, because it turns human suffering into a technical term.
Right. And sometimes you need to call that out. Referring to civilian deaths as collateral damage feels like a way to avoid accountability.
Now we're getting into the language of moral critique, which is its own skill.
Okay, here's a big one, to escalate. It means to increase in intensity or severity. The conflict escalated when both sides refused to negotiate.
The opposite is to de-escalate, to reduce tension. Diplomats are working to de-escalate the situation before it turns violent.
In everyday life, you can use this too. The argument escalated quickly when someone brought up past grievances.
Or I'm trying to de-escalate here. Let's all take a breath and start over.
Another phrase, a stalemate. It comes from chess, but it's used in politics and conflict. It means a situation where neither side can win or make progress.
Peace negotiations have reached a stalemate. Neither side is willing to compromise.
Or, in your personal life, my roommate and I are in a stalemate over who should do the dishes. We're both too stubborn to give in.
I love when serious political vocabulary applies to petty domestic disputes.
Right? Makes you feel worldly.
Okay, here's one that's everywhere in the news. Humanitarian crisis. It means a situation where large numbers of people are suffering and need urgent help, usually due to war, natural disaster, or famine.
The ongoing conflict has created a humanitarian crisis, with millions of people displaced from their homes.
And when you hear displaced, that's another key word. It means forced to leave your home or country. Displaced refugees, people who have been pushed out by violence or disaster.
This vocabulary is heavy. It carries real weight. And I think that's why a lot of learners avoid these topics, not just because the vocabulary is hard, but because it feels morally heavy to talk about suffering in a language that's not your first.
That's such a good point. There's a vulnerability in it. Like, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I sound insensitive?
And honestly, that fear is valid. But avoiding the conversation means you're cutting yourself off from huge parts of the English-speaking world, news, debates, important discussions.
So, we practice. We get comfortable with discomfort. Okay, we've been pretty heavy. Let's shift. Because one thing I've noticed, when people talk about serious issues in English, they often get stuck in doom language. Everything is terrible, or a disaster, or hopeless.
Yeah, and sometimes things are terrible. But even in dark situations, there's usually some nuance, some small light.
Right. And the language of hope and possibility is just as important as the language of critique. Maybe more important.
So let's start with this phrase, cautiously optimistic. It means hopeful, but not naive. You see some positive signs, but you're not getting carried away.
I'm cautiously optimistic about the new peace talks. There's momentum, but we've been here before.
It's a phrase that signals maturity. You're not a cynic, but you're not a dreamer either.
I use this in job situations. I'm cautiously optimistic about this opportunity. The interview went well, but I'm not counting on it until I have an offer in writing.
Realistic hope. That's the vibe.
Another one. there's room for progress. It means improvement is possible, even if it's not guaranteed.
The situation is difficult, but I believe there's room for progress if both sides can find common ground.
And speaking of common ground, that's a phrase too. It means shared interests or beliefs that can form the basis for agreement.
Despite their political differences, they were able to find common ground on environmental policy.
Or in a relationship, we fight about money all the time, but we've found common ground on how to raise our kids.
Here's another one that's useful: a silver lining. It means a positive aspect in an otherwise negative situation.
It comes from the phrase, every cloud has a silver lining.
The pandemic was devastating. But one silver lining was that it forced many companies to finally embrace remote work.
Or personal, getting laid off was awful, but the silver lining was it pushed me to start my own business, which I'd been too scared to do before.
And finally, this one is big: to hold space for hope. It's a more poetic phrase. It means to allow yourself to believe in possibility even when things are hard.
I don't know if this peace process will succeed, but I'm choosing to hold space for hope.
It's not naive. It's intentional. It's saying, I see the darkness, but I refuse to let it be the only thing I see.
And maybe that's the real skill here. Not just learning vocabulary, but learning how to carry complexity in your speech. How to say, this is hard, and there's hope. This is unjust, and I believe in change.
That's not just English. That's wisdom.
Okay, I want to share something a little vulnerable here. For a long time, I avoided talking about politics or current events in English. And I told myself it was because I didn't know enough vocabulary.
But that wasn't the real reason?
No. The real reason was I was afraid of being misunderstood. Or worse, of saying something clumsy and having someone think I was cruel or ignorant.
That's a real fear.
It is. And I think a lot of our listeners feel this way. Like, if I can't say something perfectly, maybe I shouldn't say it at all.
But here's what I've learned, and this took me years. People respect effort more than perfection. If you're trying to engage thoughtfully with a difficult topic, most people will give you grace, even if your phrasing is imperfect.
Yeah. And actually, some of the most meaningful conversations I've had in English have been the ones where I stumbled, where I said, I'm not sure I have the right words for this, but let me try.
That honesty is disarming. It invites the other person into the struggle with you.
Exactly. And I think that's what we want to leave you with here. It's not about sounding like a politician or a news anchor. It's about being able to express your full self, your full range of thought, even when the topics are heavy.
You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be brave enough to try.
Here's a line I want you to remember. Fluency isn't about never making mistakes. It's about making mistakes and continuing anyway.
That's quotable right there.
Okay, let's slow things down a little. Word tour time. We covered a lot of ground today, so let's walk back through some of the key phrases and really cement them.
First up, to provide analysis. This means to examine something carefully and explain your reasoning. It's formal, professional. 2 examples. Could you provide some analysis on why sales dropped last quarter? Or casual, instead of just saying you don't like the movie, can you provide some actual analysis?
And this week, I'm going to try to provide more analysis in my work reports instead of just listing facts.
Good. Next, to take into account. meaning to consider something as part of your thinking. When making your decision, please take into account the budget constraints. Or casual, I took into account the fact that you'd been up all night when I asked how you were doing.
I need to take into account the fact that I'm not 22 anymore when I schedule back-to-back late nights.
Painful, but true. Okay, here's a good one. I see where you're coming from, but this is how you respectfully disagree. I see where you're coming from, but I think we need more data before we decide. Or, I see where you're coming from, but have you considered the long-term consequences?
Compare that to the weaker I don't agree, which just sounds flat and mildly rude.
Next, to push back on something slightly. This means to challenge or question an idea, but gently. I'd like to push back on that timeline slightly. I think we need more time. Or, I'm going to push back on your assumption that everyone wants the same thing here.
I pushed back on my friend's suggestion that we go hiking at 6 a.m. Slightly? No. Aggressively.
Fair. Okay, here's one. Collateral damage. Originally a military term for unintended harm, but used more broadly now. Civilian deaths are often dismissed as collateral damage in war, or metaphorically, when the company restructured, a lot of good employees became collateral damage.
It's a cold phrase, but sometimes you need it to name what's happening.
Next, cautiously optimistic. Hopeful, but realistic. I'm cautiously optimistic about the new treatment. Early results are promising. Or, I'm cautiously optimistic about this first date. We had a good conversation, but it's just one meeting.
I'm cautiously optimistic about my ability to wake up early tomorrow. History suggests otherwise.
Another one. Common ground. Shared interests or beliefs. Despite our different backgrounds, we found common ground in our love of books. Or, in negotiation, let's try to find some common ground before we get stuck on the details.
I found common ground with my neighbor over our mutual hatred of leaf blowers.
Bonding through shared annoyance. Classic. Last one. A silver lining. A positive aspect in a bad situation. Losing my job was devastating. But the silver lining was it forced me to pursue my real passion. Or, the silver lining of this rainy weekend is I finally have time to rest.
The silver lining of this heavy episode is we all expanded our vocabulary by at least 10 powerful phrases.
And that's not nothing. All right, practical time. Here's your experiment for this week.
Find one news article in English about a current event. Doesn't have to be war or politics. Could be anything serious. Environmental issue. Economic trend. Social change. Read it.
Then, write 3 sentences or record yourself saying 3 sentences. 1. One sentence summarizing what happened, use to take into account. 2. One sentence where you disagree with someone's position or add nuance, use I see where you're coming from, but, or I'd push back slightly. 3. One sentence expressing hope or possibility, use cautiously optimistic or there's room for progress.
That's it. 3 sentences. You're practicing holding complexity in English. Fact. Critique. Hope.
You can do this in a journal, in a voice memo, or if you're feeling brave, post it in the comments below this video. We'd love to see what article you chose and how you responded to it.
This isn't about being right or having the perfect opinion. It's about stretching your English into uncomfortable, important territory.
And remember, you don't need to solve world peace. You just need to be able to talk about it.
Okay, comment challenge time. We want to know.
What's one serious topic you avoid discussing in English because the vocabulary feels too complex? And which phrase from today's episode might help you finally talk about it?
Structure it like this. I usually avoid talking about underscore, 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 because underscore, 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 but the phrase underscore, underscore might help me say underscore, underscore.
For example, I usually avoid talking about climate change because I don't know how to disagree without sounding preachy. But the phrase, I see where you're coming from, but might help me have more balanced conversations.
We'll read every comment. Promise.
And if this episode stretched your English in a good way, if you feel even slightly more capable of handling complex conversations, hit that like button. It genuinely helps us reach more learners.
Subscribe if you haven't already. We're here every week, giving you real English for real life.
Not textbook English, not surface English, the full palette.
And hey, thank you for going into the deep end with us today. These topics aren't easy, but you showed up anyway.
That takes courage. And that courage? That's what makes you unstoppable.
See you next time.
Stay curious.